Hello, everyone. Your wonderful MC is back just for another few seconds. So I hope you all enjoyed visiting the booths. I know everything is moving along fairly quickly here, but these online events, as you know, we're all getting a little weary of them, and we didn't want to extend it for the full day. So now we're going to move into the lunch keynote. But just before I hand it over to Kendalle Connell, I'm going to just give you a little briefing on how to vote for your favorite poster. So if you see over here next to chat and messages, there's something called poll, and there's a little red dot on poll, which means we're live now with the poll. So if you click on poll, you will see all 20 posters. And you can click on any one poster, and that will record your vote. You can always come back to the poll during the keynote if you change your mind to click on a different poster. Again, you will only be, the system will only allow one vote per participant. So you have all the way through the keynote to pick your favorite poster. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kendalle O'Connell, the interim CEO of MassBio.
Thank you, Vineet. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendalle Burlin O'Connell, President and COO of MassBio. MassBio represents more than 1,400 members who are operating at the forefront of biopharma innovation and are dedicated to developing life-saving therapies and cures so patients everywhere can have hope for a better tomorrow. MassBio works with transformative biotechs across their growth continuum, from connecting emerging entrepreneurs with the innovation ecosystem that can help take their science from lab to market, to offering pre-vetted savings and rewards on the products and services that are vital to growing an established biopharma organization. Our goal at MassBio is to ensure that these companies have all of the tools, resources, and opportunities they need to make the impossible possible. Over the past year, we've seen just what can happen when all ecosystem stakeholders come together to support groundbreaking science. We truly can do anything. This is why MassBio is a proud partner of MALSI Day and has supported this landmark event for so many years. MALSI plays a critical role in advancing Massachusetts leadership in the life sciences by convening the ecosystem to catalyze collaborative innovation and bring early-stage research to market. We look forward to working with all of you here today to fuel the next generation of scientific breakthroughs. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's keynote speaker, Dr. Barbara Fox, CEO of Rheos Medicines. Over the course of her career, Barbara has launched and developed numerous clinical stage biotech companies. Now, as CEO of Rheos Medicine, she is working to unlock a new frontier in drug discovery by developing novel medicines that modulate immune cell metabolism to treat patients with severe autoimmune disease and cancer. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Barbara in her role as a MassBio board member, and I'm always impressed by her knowledge of the life sciences, her astute observation, and her masterful ability to speak simply and straightforward about complicated issues. I'm looking forward to hearing from Barbara today as she's joined by Kate Sheridan, a reporter at Stat News, who will be facilitating the conversation. Barbara and Kate, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kendalle. I see Barbara is about to join us.
All right.
tell you, but my camera seems to be off again, so I need to refresh. So just bear with me. Sorry about that.
Of course. While Barbara's doing that, I'll just kind of give a brief overview of some of her recent accomplishments, I suppose, for those of you who are listening. Barbara is, of course, not only the CEO of Rheos Medicines, but she also was behind Telos most recently, which Merck acquired in a really incredible deal in 2019.
All right, I am back, but my camera is still not on, even after refreshing. So I am going to ask, I am not 100% sure what to do about that. So, I can try refreshing once more. Otherwise, we may have to do this without being able to see me. I'm really not quite sure what to do. You saw me backstage, and it was just fine.
Let's try refreshing one more time, I guess.
All right, hold on. Well, that did not seem to work. So I am at a loss. So maybe you're just going to have to talk to me without seeing my smiling face, unless Rachel has some ideas about what we could do.
I think let's get started without, and we'll go from there. It'll be like a podcast.
All right, perfect.
A very one-sided podcast. Barbara, you've had a really remarkable and almost unlikely career. Obviously, I gave our audience a brief overview of your more recent accomplishments just before you came back to us. But one of the things that's most striking about your path to entrepreneurship is that you actually moved away from a tenured position in academia to biotech. Tell us a little bit more about what the turning point was for you. How did you decide to change course?
Sure. So I was on the, was an academic at University of Maryland in rheumatology. As you said, had just gotten tenure and was associate professor and gotten funded. And in all honesty, I didn't think I was doing anything particularly important. So I just, I was getting published and I looked at what I was spending my time on. And as any academic knows, it's a killing, kind of brutal workload, writing grants and writing papers and trying to balance everything. And I looked at what I was doing. It just didn't seem to be meaningful. And so I got a call from a recruiter about a job in biotech. And we also had wanted to move back to the New England area because of family reasons, and took the job and moved to Immulogic, which was a kind of mid-stage biotech company. And it had everything that I had been missing in academia, which was the ability to work in a team, to develop drugs, to do kind of something that I felt would have much, much more impact on the world. So it was a tough company, in all honesty. It had kind of challenging politics, and as an academic, you've never had a boss before, and all of a sudden you land in industry and you have a boss, and parts of it were pretty hard, but I never regretted the move ever. So.
You said that it had everything that you were looking for. How did you actually come up with that list in the first place? I assume it took quite a bit of reflection.
Well, I knew there were a lot of things I didn't like about academia. So my parents had both been academic scientists, and so I had grown up always assuming that was a world I was going to be in. But it's a very solitary world. You are responsible for your own lab and your own work, and you may have collaborators, but basically it's sort of you against the world. There's also, in a funny way in academia, that in a way that I've never seen in industry, you are judged as a person by your professional success. So, if whether or not you get a plenary session at a major clinical conference determines your value as a human being, or whether you got a Nature paper or Cell paper or whatever, in a way that it just isn't true in industry. And I got tired of it. I think I just found it exhausting in a way that wasn't productive for me. And I also think I have much, much better instincts at applied science than I did at basic science. So I think that was part of it as well.
I think your resume speaks for itself in terms of your instincts as well. You, of course, were, as I said to our audience before, the CEO of Telos, which Merck acquired recently. Maybe not so recently anymore, but it still certainly seems recent to me anyway. I'm most curious, though, about the lessons that you learned from a company that came before Telos. I'm curious what your experience at Avaxia taught you about biotech entrepreneurship, because obviously at some point you made the jump from being, in industry to being a leader in industry.
Yeah.
What did Avaxia teach you?
So Avaxia taught me a lot. I mean, I did it for a long time. Avaxia was we were developing orally delivered antibody therapeutics for diseases of the GI tract. I suspect I presented at MALSI. I'm sure I had a poster at MALSI Day. I think I presented everywhere. We got a first program through an initial clinical trial in ulcerative colitis. Was actually, the data looked really good. We had a couple of challenges before us. One was probably the most significant was our funding strategy. So we were funded by angel investors. So we raised about $25 million from individual angel investors, along with about $6 million in grant funding. We had a BARDA contract and some NIH money. Although that's a lovely source of capital for some things, particularly if you can kind of get to an exit with less than $10 million. For therapeutics, angel financing is really, really challenging, partly because the amount of money that's required for therapeutics is a little bit mind-blowing. And probably more importantly, because it's very, very hard to build on an angel finance company and bring in venture capital on top of it. And we needed venture to take this forward, to get into later stage clinical trials. We had 120 people on our cap table, and it's almost impossible to go from that type of angel financing to more traditional venture financing. Yeah. And so you asked me a simple question, I gave you a very long answer, but I think the thing I really took away from it was that you have to pay as much attention to your financing strategy as you do to your science. That, it's, as a scientist, it's really easy to think that the only thing that matters is your data. And every investor will say, oh, just show me this experiment, just show me this experiment, just show me this experiment. But that's frequently, even though that's what they're asking for, that's not what's actually going to make a difference. And what you really, you need to think about the business aspects. You need to get somebody working alongside of you that can tell you that not just the source of capital, but the pedigree of capital matters. And this should resonate for every academic if you think about it in terms of grant funding in your own life. So it's easier to get a grant if you're at Harvard than it is at Framingham State. It is easier to raise subsequent rounds of capital if your first financing came from Third Rock Ventures than if it came from a group of individual investors that none of those later stage investors have ever heard of. It's just the reality of the world we live in. It's how people vet the quality of what you're doing, the pedigree of what you're doing is through all of those other issues. Somebody's telling me to just check the site settings, but I think I'm just going to stick with this. I can't troubleshoot the camera and talk at the same time. So anyway, think about the financing. Think about it in ways, even if people will give you advice on this sort of stuff that will not seem to make any sense to you, because to you feel like money is money, but really money is almost as important as the science, and think about it in that light.
So I want to get into some of the fundamentals of all the points you just brought up. For example, you said that, angel financing is really challenging, and that it can be difficult after getting an angel round to move into bigger investors, venture investors. What exactly makes it so challenging? Why, I suppose, was it a problem potentially that Avaxia had that many people on its cap table, that many investors? Yeah,
so because it wasn't a problem at all running the company. I mean, it was a great group of investors. I think we handled we had a really good relationship. We had a very good way of communicating with our investors. But from the venture perspective, they're used to having 2 or 3 other people they're on a board with that they can make decisions with. Now, all of a sudden, you have 120 people who have the potential to raise concerns and to raise problems and to raise all sorts of other stuff, and you don't know who they are, and you don't know how sophisticated they are, and you consider them kind of a pain in the butt because that's just the kind of mentality. not frequently not fair. And you can try to get around it by, which we tried to do, by rolling everybody up into a single LLC. So there's only a single vote. You don't have to go chasing signatures on things. But that still doesn't get away from the fact that people want to know who else is around the table, who else is going to, when things get rough, who else are they going to have to negotiate with? And so people like to invest with people they've invested with before, that they know their track record, that they know how they're going to behave. And so that's kind of from the investors, the venture perspective. From the angel perspective, it's also a little bit hard because the angel investors typically don't have enough capital to continue to invest as the company grows. And so they get squashed. I mean, they get their rights washed out, they get control washed out. And so it's a very tricky balance to make, which is why I think many angel investors prefer to stay in the diagnostics, digital health, things where, it's just less capital intensive than therapeutics.
Right, where they can get to an exit with that $10 million, like yes, you were saying earlier.
Exactly.
Gotcha. I'm curious, I guess, how people can learn this stuff. You've obviously learned a lot of this from experience, I think. How can people who are new to the field start gathering intelligence about what kind of financing strategy will work for their company, or who they should take money from, or what kind of pedigree will be most effective for them? How do people learn this stuff?
So I've sat through every boot camp training session. For me, there were a number that were specifically directed at women. So as part of the Springboard, I think it was my first company was one of the initial Springboard class. Springboard promotes entrepreneurship for women. Same thing with Osteo, which is primarily a West Coast women's entrepreneurship program. But there are other ones. MassBio has a number of programs. Obviously, events like today where you can talk to people, and then just network with as many people as you can, because what I found is that it's an extraordinarily generous ecosystem. I mean, people are really, really willing to spend time to help you figure stuff out. I mean, I coach now through Mass Next Gen, which is another women-focused entrepreneurship program. So there are lots and lots of opportunities, particularly in Boston, to try to learn it. So you have to sit through them, and you have to try to listen, and you probably are really well suited if you're an academic scientist to find a partner who's coming at it more from the business side, so that you don't have to kind of make every mistake yourself, because I made a lot of mistakes.
What do you think was the most educational mistake that you made?
Was probably Avaxia, because it was just a failure. I mean, when I look at kind of where I lost a lot of people, a lot of money. A lot of people put their faith in me. I think the technology was really good, had tremendous potential, and I think the data were good, and we just I could not figure out how to thread that needle to take it forward. And I think I had always assumed as a scientist that the only acceptable reason to fail was because the science failed. That this was one big experiment, and fine, you gave it your best shot, and if the clinical data were wrong or the scientific data were wrong, and you failed because of that, then that was kind of a noble way to fail, or that was kind of acceptable. That was the risk you took. But there are lots of other ways you can fail, and they're very humbling, realizing that you didn't pick your right financing strategy, or that you made mistakes in how you constructed the team, or how you interacted with your board, or innumerable other things, how you thought about how you discounted various pieces of advice that were given to you over the years. Because you're always walking that balance between needing to bull your way through every obstacle, because otherwise you'll never make it, and listening to all the people saying, like, that's a mistake, that's a mistake, that's a mistake. So if you listen to them too much, you're paralyzed. But if you don't listen to them, you make a lot of mistakes. So it's why you're way better off doing these things as teams, or learning a little bit more along the way than I did. I mean, I went a long time without salary. We had talked about that before. I mean, there's a ton of risks to doing this, to learning the hard way. Learning on your own is not an easy path.
Yeah. I want to get back to what happened after Avaxia, because obviously this mistake was not catastrophic for your career. Like, obviously you've had a lot of career since then. And so it clearly wasn't a mistake that was that was career ending. But I do want to touch on what you just said, because I know that's a really important thing for entrepreneurs to be talking about. What kinds of questions, I guess, should people be asking themselves if they want to start a new company, if they want to get into entrepreneurship? What do they need to be prepared for?
So if you are, I think being a solo entrepreneur right now, or kind of starting it off with a small team, is hard. In the therapeutic space, very few, most companies are started by venture these days, so very tough path kind of going it alone. But if you're going to do that, and if you've kind of figured out that, I can get enough, I know kind of a way to raise capital and I know how to get there, you just have a really high likelihood of failure. That's true of most companies. That's not specific to the life sciences. Most startups fail. And you just have to be sort of both emotionally and financially prepared for that. So when I started my first company, I told my husband, okay, 6 months without salary, and then I'll be fine. And it was like 5 years. And then my next company also didn't take salary. So I think I went an incredibly long time without salary. So you have to have you have to have a spouse with an income, or you have to be, financially independent, or you need to be consulting on the side enough to pay your bills. But don't underestimate, it's great for the ecosystem that everybody's taking these risks, because if 90% of companies, 99% of companies fail and 1% make it through, it's great for the biotech ecosystem. But for the individual entrepreneurs in those 99 companies, it's really hard. So make sure that you're not overexposing yourself. Make sure you're not taking on more risk than you can actually financially handle. Because I do worry sometimes we spend so much time promoting entrepreneurship and singing the praises, and it is the most unbelievably satisfying thing you can do in some ways. But I don't know that we always communicate the risks so adequately.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious as well what you would advise people who are listening to this and maybe think, oh, I actually haven't considered these questions. I don't know if I'm ready yet. What should they do to prepare themselves, or to better prepare themselves, better set themselves up, so they can do this in a way that positions them well?
Well, you never, if you're somebody who is going to listen to this and say like, okay, I can't do it, then you probably shouldn't do it anyway. Because if you're really, there's a certain element of arrogance or naivete or something that's required to kind of do this. But make sure your spouse is, if you're married, or your partner or whoever is on board with the risks that you are taking, because it's, money is always challenging in relationships. So make sure you've got your kind of personal side covered. And then that you've just kind of thought it through a little bit and have made that calculus in your own head, which is sort of what launched me as an entrepreneur, that I would rather try it and fail than find myself at the end of my career looking back and regretting never having made that leap. So if you think those regrets of never having tried are going to outweigh the possibility of failure, then it's probably not a bad thing to do. So.
Gotcha. I know one thing that you brought up that would be actually a really important thing for would-be entrepreneurs to have is a really strong network, right? You need to have a network, so you have people who to give you advice, you have people who can kind of point you in the direction of folks whose money might be really, really helpful down the line, for example. Networking to me has always felt very recursive, where if you already have a strong network, it's easier to build on it. And if you have a very weak network, it's really, really hard. I guess I'm curious what kind of advice you would give to people in terms of networking. Are there, for example, stupid questions? Is there ever such a thing as a stupid question to be asking someone who you want to network with? Or is it really truly just ask what you want to ask?
No, there's always because you're trying. So if you have it's true that if you have an existing network, it's way easier. So that your best networks are people you've worked with. So the best advice is to go spend a couple of years in biotech or in pharma or something, build out that network, or in venture or something, build out that network that way. Then you have people who kind of know what they're doing to give you advice. But if you don't have that, you can still find it. You can find through things like MALSI Day, you can find ways of kind of connecting with people. It's harder, but you can get there. And if you're networking cold with people, you can ask questions that are so stupid that people aren't going to want to talk to you about it. So you have to do your homework a little bit. You are selling yourself a bit in every interaction with somebody you have to communicate that you are somebody that is worth them spending some time in. So, do your homework, be respectful, listen to the advice, even if you, in fact, don't act on it, actually listen to it. And leverage the connections you do have to get warm introductions to the people you most want to get to. But it is all about people, and it is all really about your reputation. So, you asked before about how I survived professionally after Avaxia, and yeah, I did just fine. Again, I think I wasn't great for the technology, wasn't great for the investors, but it was fine for me personally because I landed my next position because of some of the people who had been investors in Avaxia, who'd been individual investors, and brought me into what was then Partners Innovation Fund as a entrepreneur in residence, because your reputation is everything in this field. Keep your integrity, your respect for people, make sure people respect you and trust you, is because if you lose that, then you're just toast. I mean, unless you've made somebody like hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they are a little bit more forgiving. But if you're not in that position, then your people need to like you, they need to trust you, and they need to respect you. And so when you're asking questions, you do need to walk that balance of not losing somebody's respect.
Yeah, gotcha. Let's actually get into Telos and what happened after Avaxia. Take us through a little bit, not blow by blow maybe, but how did all this come together? How did you find your way to Partners? Obviously, you kind of got into it a little bit. There was a connection there.
Yeah. So we shut Avaxia down. We kind of basically went essentially into bankruptcy. Some of the assets got bought by one of our investors. And I got asked to come in to talk to Partners Innovation Fund, which is now Mass General Brigham Innovation Fund, I believe, by some of the partners who had been angel investors in the company. So Carl Burke, I believe, I'm trying to remember who was actually an angel investor in that, maybe Jay Knowles. I had known Meredith Fisher through various kind of entrepreneurial interactions before. They had just increased the size of their fund from a very small, like $35 million fund to a much more substantial fund. They were interested in starting to build companies, grow companies. And so they wanted to start an entrepreneur in residence program. And so they brought me in as the first EIR to start looking at technologies and thinking about starting a company up. And so that was just a great relationship. We ended up founding Telos out of technology, out of the Brigham. And it was just, it was a new opportunity for me because it was starting with somebody else's technology instead of my own, which was different. But it was just a fabulous environment and lots of smart people. So.
And then obviously after Telos got acquired, what happened next? You've obviously made your way to Rheos. How did that happen?
Yeah. So after Telos was a financially great exit for the investors. There was a good outcome for the technology. It was good for the team. So we got bought by Merck when we were still preclinical. And that falls in the category of once you have made people money, it opens up doors. So I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I kind of had three things highest on my list. I wanted to do immunology because I'm an immunologist. I wanted to do autoimmunity because Telos had been focused on cancer, but I have a very kind of close personal family drive around autoimmunity. My older sister had ended up dying from complications of Crohn's disease, and just have always wanted to work more in that space. And then I wanted to work, if at all possible, for a Third Rock company. And I'll talk about why in a second. And so I got a call kind of went in to talk to Third Rock originally about actually EIR opportunities. I knew Bob Kamen, who's at Third Rock, who had actually been an angel investor in Avaxia and an advisor in Avaxia. I knew Keith Dion, who's a Third Rock CEO, because he and I are in a CEO group together. So again, general networking. I'd met Abby Selnicker. Went in and talked to them and got introduced to Rheos, which was a company that was about a year and a half old at the time, and just really fell in love with the opportunity to do something transformational in autoimmunity and with a completely different investor base. I mean, it's everything I had done before, where these little scrappy companies where, you're trying to kind of take a single asset, get it to a certain inflection point and take it forward. Rheos is an opportunity to do something kind of transformative. It's big science. You can actually build a company. You can invest in people. You can invest in technology. It's just it's a different way of approaching the field, and it's been it's quite lovely. It's different. It's just different.
How is it different? Obviously, you kind of have given some general thoughts on how it's different, but let's get a little bit deeper.
So it is. It's different in terms of the level of support you have behind you. So you have not only an experienced board, but you have kind of a network behind that of advisors and investors and people who can help with recruiting and people who can help with, you end up with a problem with your lead drug that you can't figure out. And there's, 4 venture partners who've dealt with exactly the same problem before that can kind of come and weigh in. You're looking for consultants and you can draw on this network. And then you have access, doors open for you for future capital raise that is again, that pedigree dependence that is incredibly helpful. And then you have a different time horizon because you're looking at, you have an investor base or founders who are interested in doing something fundamental and important, and therefore you can tackle something that may not play out for 5 or 6 years instead of like, what's my value inflection point in the next, 18 months because I need to drive that next round of capital.
Right.
And so it just allows you to think about it differently.
It comes back to that financing strategy being just as important as the science, because you can't do science without money. And Gotcha. Yep. You mentioned at the very top of your discussion about Rheos that you wanted to work for a Third Rock company. Very specifically, that was 33% of the things that you were hoping for from this job. What about Third Rock in particular was so appealing?
Well, a couple things. Abby Selnicker, who is managing general partner there, is a woman, and there are not very many women venture capitalists in the life sciences, and that was incredibly appealing. And I know just through my CEO networks, I know people working in all of the major kind of venture networks, and they all have slightly different flavors and different things that they focus on. And is it kind of more build to buy opportunities or build big companies or just what's that balance of science versus market focus versus other things. And Third Rock just had a reputation of being an extraordinarily supportive environment for their CEOs, for their companies, a very sticky community. Once you're kind of in that family, they take care of people, and that makes it easier to recruit scientists because they know, if something happens to Rheos, they'll be able to go into another Third Rock company. And that it just makes everything easier. And when you don't have all that stuff to worry about, you can worry about the science and the company.
Yeah, this is kind of maybe a bit of a pet interest of mine, but I'm also very interested in the stickiness of these ecosystems and how that actually is built. How exactly does Third Rock create such a sticky environment? You say that scientists at Rheos, if things were to go bad, would be able to move around. How does that actually work in practice?
So you get to know the scientists develop a reputation, and if there's another, say something, one Third Rock company shuts down or something happens, there is an expectation that the board or the partners or the executives in the team are going to go out of their way to find another position. You've got a reputation. You'll be able to say, you can vouch for somebody. They did a great job in this particular position. I think they would do really well there. And so you're not having to go in cold all the time. And then that stickiness also means they try to hold on to you because, okay, this company may get acquired or something, whatever happens, but like you were a star, we're going to want to slot you into the next one. And I think many of these networks work that way, but it also can be really hard to break in because of that. So
sure, because they have a whole roster of people that they could go to, and why would they listen to you? I'm curious, I suppose, if there are people listening to this who very much want to break in, obviously networking is going to be key, right? Is there anything else that they should be trying to do? I feel like we've been talking a lot about reputation, about building a reputation. but obviously people need to know about your work and know what you're doing in order to know who you are. I guess I'm curious how people who are listening can do that, can build an awareness of their excellent work.
Well, I mean, so obviously, if you're a scientist, it's your publications. It's all the standard stuff. It's the quality of your science. It's your publications. It's your meetings. But if you're trying to kind of make that transition from academia into industry, next time you're at a conference, go stop by the posters of people from industry and talk to them. Try to build those relationships. Ask for help from your technology licensing office. Try to find consulting gigs that you can do in industry. Try to sort of break into that world. So it depends a little bit at what level you are and also what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're looking for, scientific advisory board slots where really it is going to be your scientific creds that matter more than anything else, your publications, all the kind of standard stuff in academia, or whether you're trying to kind of get support as an entrepreneur or something else. But look for those points of intersection. I'm just always amazed when I've talked in the past to postdocs trying to figure out how to break into industry, and you ask, when you go to a meeting, to ACR or whatever, ASCO or whatever it might be, do you ever go to the posters and talk to people from industry? And it's just no, I go talk to my friends. It's well, that's how you make new friends. It's go talk to those people. So not that scary.
Gotcha. I'm curious as well, kind of, you've talked about angels a lot, and I'd love to dig into that, because as much as, I feel like a lot of our early conversation was about, this is still a really risky, you do want to be very careful about your financing strategy. Angels is still very much part of the biotech startup ecosystem. And so I'm curious, I suppose, how people who are listening can gauge what angels are, I don't want to say good angels, but what angels are the ones that can really unlock doors for them. What angels can be great connectors for them? What angels can be really, really valuable adds to their company?
So you have to do your homework. I went almost entirely through the organized angel groups with Avaxia. There are a lot of high net worth individual angel investors and high net worth individuals and family offices are playing an increasing role in the overall ecosystem. And I don't know that the family offices in particular can be pretty opaque. It can be pretty hard to find out what they're doing. But the angel groups and the individual angels, ask them who they know, ask them what's happened to their previous company. You are doing diligence. I think that's part of the importance of financing, that it is your, just because somebody's offering you money, tempting as it is, doesn't mean you have to accept it. All money has strings attached to it, first of all. That was one of the things my Telos CSO drilled into my head. And so always think about the strings that are coming with that money and the other value that comes from that money. Do your homework. Ask them, do diligence, ask for references, talk to people who they've invested in before and see how they've behaved, if they've been helpful, just what their experience has been.
Gotcha. Other than networking and other than asking around to people that or people that you admire about their angel experiences, how can people find organized angel groups like the ones you were talking about? Do you just Google them? Is it deeper than that?
Yeah, no, there's a whole list of them, and I'm a little bit out of touch. So, but Launchpad, Mass Life Science, Mass MMA, Mass Medical Angels. There's a whole number of them. And they'll have a website. You can kind of throw your, a business plan in over the transom, which is not the way to do it. You will not succeed. So you need to go to the angel website. You need to look at who their members are, if you can find it, and you've got to find a person. So again, it is all about people. And there is this view, which I think is warranted, that any entrepreneur worth their salt can figure out how to find me. So if you can't get a warm introduction through somebody then you're never going to be able to build a company, because figure it out. Figure out somebody on LinkedIn that went to school with them that will get you in front of them. You've got to use those sort of people skills. to get a warm introduction, because you need an internal sponsor at any of these angel groups if you want to work your way through the process. You just need somebody who will back you.
That seems like actually a really useful stress test for people to keep in mind, that if you can't get a warm introduction to this person, you need to do a little bit more work on your network. You need to develop it a little bit further. That actually seems like a really useful rule of thumb for people to keep in mind.
Yes.
You said as well that money always comes with strings. I want to make it very explicit, like what kinds of strings money can come with, because I do feel like if I were in an entrepreneur's shoes, I would think, money, great, I need money to run my experiments. What kinds of strings should people be mindful of?
Well, nobody's given you, I mean, unless you're getting a grant from, which arguably probably doesn't have strings. So, you get an NIH grant, that's about as string-free as you can get. But beyond that, if you're doing a for-profit and somebody is investing in you, there are control provisions with that money. There are obligations that are associated with it. The people who are giving you money have some not unreasonable expectation of having a say in what happens, or doing something to ensure that they get a return. And you want to understand what those are. And you in a weird sort of way, though, a really common error, I think, of early stage entrepreneurs is being overly concerned about valuation and control. If you're going to raise money, you are going to lose control. There is just like your investors become your partners. And if you can't figure that out, if you can't deal with that, then wait until you're independently wealthy and fund it yourself. But if you're going to ask people to give you substantial amounts of money, they are going to be a partner with you in this enterprise, and you're going to lose some control. And so you want to know what they're looking for, what their expectations are, and what kind of control they have in your legal documents to make sure that it ends up as a good outcome for them.
It sounds like it's not like there's a red flag provision per se, but more of that relationship again, where you need to gauge how the relationship might intertwine with that legal documentation. Exactly.
Gotcha. That there's always, I mean, I'm sure there are red flags, but it's just that it's always there, and to expect it not to be is unreasonable. So you just want to be aware of it.
Gotcha. Carmel has a really interesting question in the Q&A actually that I'm gonna pull up for us. Carmela wants to know if you have ever said no to a term sheet, and if you have, can you tell us more about the reason for saying no?
Yeah, I have, and it was, I wonder how much I can say about this. So with Avaxio, we actually had a term sheet from like a really good venture. Really, before we started down the angel path, we had a term sheet from a really good venture syndicate. And we had competing term sheets from 2 venture syndicates, which in retrospect is just like, I could pinch myself. And we accepted one of them. And in between the term sheet and the close, they walked away. And I couldn't get the first one back. And I could just still kick myself from ever after. But anyway, so I don't know whether I could have done that one better. I probably didn't listen to somebody I should have listened to in making that determination. Have I ever turned down other money? Oh, I think it's one of those things that sounds way better than it is, and I've probably always taken every piece of money that's ever been offered to me. So I don't know beyond that first term sheet whether I actually ever have.
I'm curious, I guess, almost why you were kicking yourself about that. It sounds like you were saying you couldn't have done anything differently. Was it just that you weren't pleased with the outcome?
Picked the first one, if I had picked the first group, it just would have been a different path. Might not have, it just would have been different. So it was just painful at the time. So.
Oh, I'm certain. I'm always reminded of the butterfly effect of these kinds of things. So, like, what if you had taken that term sheet and then Telos didn't exist, or you're not at Rheos? And
that's right. Don't forget that, like, a term sheet is not, as one of my advisors once said, like, you do not get to open a bottle of champagne for a term sheet. You get to open a bottle of champagne when the wire clears the bank account. So.
And then you can buy the champagne.
And then you can afford to buy the champagne.
Exactly. Andy has kind of another question that's a bit about Third Rock versus angels and that decision-making process, I guess. Andy asks, now that you've experienced the Third Rock ecosystem, would you ever go back to angels? I believe he's asking angels or corporate venture. This seems like kind of a personal call, but I'm curious how you think about it.
Well, corporate venture, for sure. I mean, corporate venture is just another form of venture. I mean, they they fund alongside of everyone else. Well, first of all, this is like my last operating role, so I'm not doing, this is my last one. So you can quote me on that and hold me to it. But yeah, they're just different. So I think I think running a company with angel investors is if it's the right fit, it's just a wonderful way to do it. You have like really people who are totally engaged with what you're doing and supportive, and you end up with these people who are really well motivated and can be very experienced and insightful in your field if you pick the right ones. And you do have a lot more control over kind of the path forward. So for the right technology, I could certainly see doing it. I had very, very few bad experiences with angel investors, which kind of remarkable given how many we had. It's just fitting what you want to do with what the source of capital is. That's all.
I want to actually end this discussion on a very future-facing note. I'm curious if you think that the role that angels play, the role that venture plays, will change in the future. If kind of the angel-funded, angel-backed, entrepreneur-led biotech companies that they start up with their own technology will ever come back. I guess it sounds from earlier that you're. I don't know what you'd say actually to that question. I'm curious what you think.
Answer. I'm really bad at predicting trends. I mean, there's no question that at least in therapeutics, the trend is towards these enormous capital raises. You have $100 million Series A's, and the venture funds are starting companies internally. They're not looking to kind of outside sources to come in and pitch an idea that they go and fund. And I think some of that's driven just by the fact that the IPO market's been open for so long and that there's so much capital available. And so I do think these things go in cycles. So it's quite possible that, you'll get to a point where capital becomes scarcer, IPO window closes, the fundamentals of the market change, and you're going to be looking for more, initial ideas that you can kind of take forward, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. And it's frustrating because there's just not that many paths for individual entrepreneurs.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you so much again for making the time to speak with us, Barbara. I
know we've got like 2 minutes. The one area that we had talked about that I wanted to make sure we caught on was the both gender and ethnic and other challenges that in entrepreneurship, because it is sources of capital tend to be white men.
As you were saying earlier.
Whether that's angels or venture, that's just sort of that's where money has traditionally been. And so that's kind of where it comes in. And it's harder to break into that if you're a woman. It's way harder to break into it if you're a person of color. And so I think there's a whole bunch of groups that are trying to make that better. I think it's got a long ways to go, but I did at least want to flag that there are a number of affinity groups, certainly for women, there's Latinos in bio, women in bio, out bio for the LGBTQ community, all sorts of things. You can find ties to that on the MassBio's ED&I initiative website, because they may not be specific around entrepreneurship, but it is so important to have a home and people who you can vent to and get support from and understand where you're coming from. And I would not have ever been able to do that without some of the women's networks that I've worked with.
Yeah, so. For sure. Thank you so much again for bringing that up. I'm glad we're ending on that note, actually, so that the folks who are listening can go out and find some of these groups and find some of the support they need to make it through a really challenging experience, but hopefully a rewarding one, as it has so clearly been for you throughout your career. Thank you so much again for sharing your experiences with us, Barbara.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out the camera, but anyway.
That's all right. That's all right. We got your voice and your words, and that's
all right. Thanks so much, enough. Kate. It was a pleasure. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Barbara. That was phenomenal, as you could judge from all the chat that was going on alongside and all the questions that were being asked. And And of course, the polling was going on alongside as well. You still have, I believe, a couple more minutes to pick your favorite poster. We've got, I'm looking at some of the numbers yet. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but quite a few people have voted, but there's more people. If you haven't voted, this is your final chance to do so. So we're now shifting to an open networking session, and during this period, you can feel free to network with each other. So go to the networking tab, find tables with other people on there, and just meet new people. That's what you would do if we were doing this in person, and it works just as effectively here virtually. You can also go back to the booths and visit any posters you haven't visited before, or if you need to follow up with any that you have had visited and want to follow up. And then finally, please visit our sponsors as well. So we've got an amazing set of sponsors: MassBio, MALSI+2021, a number of law firms, a number of pharma companies, and then we will come back. We'll pull you back on to the stage at 1:45 to announce the poster winners, both the judge's favorite winner as well as the audience favorite winner. And we will Uli Stilts from another sponsor, Novo Nordisk, will be announcing the winners at 1:45. And following that, we will have our final panel, which is the Pharma Innovation Panel, which is going to be amazing as well this afternoon. So please feel free to jump around over the next hour. Feel free to grab a bite to eat while you do that. Nothing wrong with that. We're all used to grabbing food and talking at the same time nowadays. And we will see you